natural nitrous? Does anyone know what it is? I mean, what does it mean? It's the first ever standalone refrigeration system for your air induction. True cold air. Cooling down your air charge, making dense, cold, combustible air. I think it's a dream. Let's get to it. First things first, safety. That's always the first and utmost important thing. So go ahead, toggle up. Oh, there we go. Disconnect your battery. So here we are. You can disconnect at least the positive side from the battery. Okay. So after removing the positive terminal from your battery, you want to move over to the radiator covering here. Okay. So you want to go ahead and take this off, which we've already removed the screws that hold it in place, and get this out of the way, which exposes your hood latch here. So after removing the radiator and hood latch covering, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the actual headlights. There's two pins on the Mustang that you pull from here and also here. Very simple. And the headlight assembly comes out. Of course, as you can see, we've already disconnected the wiring that went to our HID headlights, but these will go off and repeat the same step on the other side on the passenger. Okay, so now we're going to be removing the front bumper. We have all the fasteners that were on the top of the bumper, and then we have the ones that are also behind the wheel well. We've removed those already, and now we are ready to also note there's two 10mm nuts that are behind each side of the bumper. We've removed them already. We will start to bring out the bumper. Done. Now we have exposed everything that we need to move on to the next step. The next step is going to be, after removing the bumper, we're going to remove the hood latch. We've already pre-loosened all of these bolts here. Now take note in something. As we remove this, we're going to have a bar, support bar here for the hood latch. This will not be reused. We're going to get rid of this. And next, we are going to be removing the air induction system from the air filter over to the throttle body assembly by a couple connections here. Here as well, which we've already pre-loosened up, along with the mass flow air sensor and the inlet air temperature sensor here. Now, key note is we will be relocating the inlet air temperature sensor over closer to the throttle body after we install the natural nitrous system, because this is what communicates to the ECU, which controls timing, fuel curve, and everything else. So now we're going to go ahead and take off mass flow air sensor housing and relocate that with the filter that we took off in the air induction. And with that, we're going to go ahead and couple that as we go to the natural nitrous system. Nice. So now, after you've taken off your bolts, separating your mass flow air sensor from the housing and shield that kept the heat away from your air induction, now we're going to take that off right now. And then you got this ring here. So that ring here is actually for your air filter. We're going to reconnect that. We're going to take all our bolts that we used to separate from this housing here, and we're going to reconnect the mass flow air housing back into this so that we can reuse this in the fender well. So we can reattach the aftermarket air filter into our new natural nitrous air system. All right, ladies and gents, so after we've removed the shield, the heat shield from the air filter and mass flow air sensor housing, now we can relocate this in the fender well. It's going to be away from the engine compartment, which is going to do the same thing as the previous heat shield tried to do, but this is going to be just an assistance that's going to help with the natural nitrous system, because after we suck in the air from here and draw through the mass air, we're going to go up through the fender well, and then we're going to go into the natural nitrous system. So then we're gonna cool the air charge down even more dramatically. And with that, our inlet air temperature sensor will be relocated. So now we are gonna tell the computer exactly what kind of air we're bringing into this motor so we can make real gains, real horsepower, real torque, and be eco-friendly. So after removing your wheel and also covering here in your fender well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna make two marks that actually go on your frame rail right here. This is your custom bracket that comes with the kit, and also your compressor. These are your high pressure refrigerant hoses, the fittings here, and also these pressure switches that come here that will be a safety feature for your compressor. Here you have the bracket which actually mounts the compressor on the frame rail, and then these holes here is what you want to line up with your frame rail. Mark your two holes here, boom, boom, and then we're gonna insert two nutserts. So now we can thread directly into the shallow side of the frame rail, and this is where you will mount your compressor. Part of your kit, you're gonna come with these nutserts. These will fit inside of a 3/8 hole, which we drilled into the frame rail here. Now is where we can bolt in our bracket into both fittings here to support our compressor. So now after installing our nutserts into the frame rail here, now we can go ahead and mount our bracket here that holds the compressor. And now we have an area here. We will have to, with the fender well covering, we're gonna have to cut this back a little bit. That's okay. And then re-secure it. This will take up the space that actually fills where we're gonna cut away, and we can go ahead and make sure that it's nice and tight. And this is where we're gonna actually mount our compressor that is our pump for the whole system, which is nicely hidden in the bumper and away from everything. Pretty sweet. And now from here you can see that after the compressor's mounted, now we have our hose fittings here. This is our suction side that goes over to the natural nitrous side here. And here is our discharge coming off of the compressor, which goes to our condenser. Very cool and sleek. Love it. So now after mounting your compressor bracket location here and the compressor here, now the compressor is going to have to discharge its hot gas into a condenser, which is right here. This condenser we will relocate, or actually locate in front of your comfort cooling condenser that's for the automobile itself. Or if you choose to have anything remote located, we have an additional upgrade with remote fans here that can cool and reject heat from any location. But as you can see on the Cobra here, we have this space that's available. After we have removed the mounting bracket, now we can easily insert the condenser where we will reject heat in this location here. You want to put your fittings on here because you want to make sure that when you're installing your condenser that you check your clearance from left to right, make sure that you have the clearance, and also you want to see which direction you're going to be routing your hoses. Go ahead and install that right in front of your comfort cooling condenser here. Goes right into place. And then you can check your left to right to make sure you have the right amount of clearance. And then we're going to be using some universal tie straps that are going to mount through the condenser. Okay, now that we got the tie strap to go through, as you can see right here, now we can begin getting this in the right location. And this is going to be the location of where we mount. And we're going to repeat the same thing, all four corners. We will have to, on this application, we're going to go ahead and remove the reservoir for the radiator just so we can get a clear peek behind there and insert tie straps through this side and mounting it. And get this puppy out of the way. Therefore we can access, and we get this portion of the radiator back here, and now we can add our tie strap through the front and repeat the same thing here, here, and the two bottom sections. We're gonna do the lower ones next, but I'm gonna go ahead and lift the car up right now because I'm not getting on the ground because I'm not as young as I used to be. So now that we've got our condenser installed, we have our compressor installed, we're moving on to your twin throttle body air induction. This is where we're going to separate it here and get rid of the OEM section, and we're going to install the natural nitrous here, and we're going to relocate our inlet air temperature sensor a little bit closer to the throttle body to give us an accurate reading of what the actual inlet air temperature is going into the motor. Okay, now we've cut OEM air induction, separated it here, and this is where we're going to relocate the air temperature sensor. So hold on to that, don't get rid of it. This is what it's going to look like going up to your throttle body, and this is where the natural nitrous system will go. The coil is helically spun, so this coil, it centrifugally spins the air. There's no pressure drop across it. So what we've done is we actually went in a 4-inch diameter to increase the air volume, have the heat exchange, and on top of that, not create a pressure drop, which is key with moving air into the engine. Let's move on to the next step. Okay, now that you can see that we have our inlet connection going to our throttle body, we have our natural nitrous system ready to rock and roll, and then we have our elbow here that's going to connect in the fender well that's going to connect to our mass flow air sensor and filter housing. Let's go ahead and lay this puppy in here. And just taking a look inside, you can see in the cylinder here where the natural nitrous is, this is what the coil looks like inside. Now this is your evaporator, which is your refrigerant coil. We use a low temperature refrigerant and get down to minus 40 degrees in here, minus 40. So we actually can have a great delta T in a short distance. Can't wait to see it on the Terminator. One connection there. Reconnect our hoses here. So I've already taken off the fittings that go to the condenser here, and I want to show you exactly how easy it is to install. So what you're going to do is put your clips on here, a little bit of refrigerant oil goes right on here. Nice, easy barbed fitting installation. And then you're going to have your cage. Cage clips right over. And that's it. So from here, reinstall your connections, and then all you're gonna have to do is measure your hose length to your desired length and go ahead and cut. All right, so now that we've hooked up all of our connections, our system is complete, all our hoses are connected. We want to go ahead and tighten up all of our connections on our condenser here and at our TXV here. All of our other connections are all of the cage and clamps that are on the system. So now the system is installed and all the hoses are connected from the condenser over to our compressor. Now we're going to hook up our gauges. With our gauges, we're going to be pressure testing the system using dry nitrogen. So with dry nitrogen, it naturally wants to cling with oxygen atoms. So it acts as a pre-evacuant. It's going to cling with any oxygen atoms that are in the system, and when we blow the system out, a lot of that oxygen that's in the system will come out with the dry nitrogen. So we're going to be using these gauges here to hook up to our system on our pressure ports that are on the compressor, where we hook up our high and low pressure safety switches for the system, and this is where we're going to hook up at. Right here on these two ports. Your blue hose is going to go to your low side, and your red hose is going to connect to the high side of the system. This way we can leak check the system and make sure everything is nice and tight and there's no leaks, so your system is sealed and there's no need to recharge the system unless there is a leak. And we'll hook up our yellow hose here to our tank of dry nitrogen. Before you guys open up the tank on the nitrogen side, make sure that your gauges are fully closed. Everything's nice and tight. Now we can open up the nitrogen and purge, getting any air out of the system, and now we can go ahead and pressure test. So now that we've hooked up our gauges, we're hooked up to the high and low side, and we've added nitrogen to the system. Now we're pressure testing at 200 PSI. So as I showed you before, we have the ports down below to where you can hook up here, where you're gonna put your high and low pressure safety switches. But also, if you want to hook up, there's some automotive connections here that you can purchase at your local hardware store that you can hook up right there at your TXV with your normal automotive hookup. So now what we want to do is, after we got the system pressurized, now we're going to go ahead and use some leak detection, some soapy bubbles, and make sure that we have no leaks. Just go ahead and lather them down. Our hoses too, make sure our clips and cages, there's no leaks there. And we know that we have a sealed tight system. So now that we've taken the nitrogen out of the system, we've released it, our gauges are back down to 0. So now we still want to leave our gauges hooked up to the system, but we have a vacuum pump which we're going to be using now, which is going to take out any moisture, oxygen from the system, and then we're going to be able to charge it with refrigerant. Now, while you're evacuating the system, you want to make sure that we bring our gauges down to at least 30 inches of vacuum. You can't get a full 30, but we want to get as close as we can, 29.9. Now, if you have a micron gauge, you can measure the amount of moisture down to the micron and get it down to around below 500 microns and keep it there for around 5 minutes before charging the system with your refrigerant. So after this step, vacuum pump on, and then we're going to move on to charging the system with our low temperature refrigerant. So now that we've evacuated the system, and as you can see with our gauges here, we're at almost a perfect vacuum. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and turn off our vacuum pump, and what we're going to do is hook up our refrigerant to the system and then charge this properly. You want to go ahead and valve off the gauges. Now the system is closed off to the gauges. We can go ahead and turn off our vacuum pump, disconnect here, and now attached to our refrigerant bottle. And once again, every time we connect something, whether it's nitrogen, anything to the system, any lines, we want to go ahead and purge any air out. Now we know that there's no contaminants or non-condensables in the system, which would cause our pressures to be higher and will stop our cooling effect. Now we're going to go ahead and turn on our scale because we want to weigh our refrigerant charge in. We want to make sure that we're going to start out with 1 pound of refrigerant, and the system usually takes around maybe 1 pound to a few ounces over that. So now that we're at 0 with our scale, we want to make sure when we're charging, now the refrigerant is in our gauges, we want to charge on the high side. You don't want to put the refrigerant in a liquid form on the low side because that's going to go directly to the compressor. The compressor can compress liquid because it's rotary style, but just in the principle of charging, it's something that is not an industry standard. So always make sure you charge on the high side. So now we're going to break that vacuum. Now we're adding refrigerant to the system, and at the same time, we're weighing it in here. Got ½ pound in right now. And while we're charging this, you can go ahead and stop, and I just want to point out, so now that the system is complete, also one thing to note is that we've also reattached our mass flow air sensor, and we have our inlet air temperature sensor here that has been relocated after the coil. So as our evaporator gets cold and our inlet air temperature starts to cool down, this will communicate to the ECU, giving the correct IATs to the ECU. So now that we have our system fully charged with refrigerant, now we want to move on to the electrical portion of the project. So we're going to be installing a relay with 12 volt switch power and relaying over 12 volt battery power over to our fan for our radiator. We need to ensure that whenever we have our system on, that we are moving air, rejecting heat across the condenser. So find a location on your vehicle where you'd like to mount this. So the switch that you have inside the car is going to be a single throw double pole. So it's going to have control power that goes to your relay, which also switches 12 volt power over to your fan. And then you're gonna have your 12 volt power supply, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but that's your power supply that actually powers up the compressor. We're gonna mount this in a location close to here next to our battery, so we can grab the 12 volt power from here and just run a single wire over here underneath the reservoir. Now over here, we're gonna remove this out of the way. This is our coolant reservoir for the supercharger, so we can get down there to the actual wiring that goes to the radiator fan. And that's where we're gonna tap in to make sure that when we turn on our power for our compressor, we're actually powering up the condenser fan as well, so we can reject that heat. So now that we've removed the 2 bolts here, we can remove the reservoir out of the way, in which we have unclipped the power supply here that goes to the radiator fan. So we're gonna be tapping into the red wire here. That's where we're gonna tee in with our relay, which will energize the radiator fan whenever we turn on the system for cooling the natural nitrous. All right, so we're wrapping up the installation of the natural nitrous kit. Now where we left off was we were talking about the relay that needed to be installed here that controls the condenser fan. So this has been installed, and we also have our power supply, but as you can see, we had to jump forward a little bit because we're gonna be taking this thing on the dyno. So we've reversed all of our steps. We have our system here, we have our compressor that's hidden in the bumper, where we now come forward to our condenser here that's installed, which you can see, it does look very OEM, which is really nice about the kit. And that's where we reject the heat. Then you have our natural nitrous system, the actual coil that's in your airstream with your relocated inlet air temperature sensor. So the system is on, and we are going to be heading to Whole Shot Performance, a local shop, and we are gonna put down some numbers tomorrow, and we will let you guys know exactly how crazy it's gonna be. Stay tuned.